Good evening, everybody. Okay, so this month's Read and Grow, we have yet another book, interesting book. It's called Mental Models, and it is by Peter Hollins. So this book is about 30 thinking tools that separates the average from being exceptional. So why did I pick this book? I thought as a leadership coach, I can help my clients to handle their challenges better. So it was purely out of selfish reasons that I picked it. But then I found it to be a big treasure house, because what I liked about this book was it's short, effective, and it has a lot of practical models. So why do we need a mental model? So the author quotes Charlie Munger. And Charlie Munger has said that in a world without mental models, it tantamounts to blindfolding yourself and randomly pointing out to a spinning globe to check where is Cuba. So in order to avoid this, that's what makes it important to have a mental model. So in my perspective, I think we all use mental models knowingly or unknowingly. And the good thing is that the author has tabulated it, given it good structure, and made it very easy for us to consume it. So at a very high level, he's classified them into 5 different topics, and he shared different sort of mental models for each of them. The first chapter dwells upon decision making for speed and context. So while making decisions, we are normally overloaded with a lot of information, but then it's key to have just the selective information and take only what really matters to make the right decisions. So the first mental model he shares is something common. Most of you are probably aware of it. It is the Eisenhower matrix. So wherein you classify your things as important, urgent, not important, and not urgent. So basically by classifying it this way, it helps you to prioritize and identify what is it that you need to work on at this particular moment. So important tasks cannot be skipped, and important tasks have to be prioritized. Whereas the urgent tasks, he says, they are normally called for speed of action, right? And it's usually from other people. But he says it's important to address what is important and not really what is urgent. The second mental model is about to visualize your dominoes. So he says most of us consider only what is really important at this point in time, but we need to think of it from a dominoes perspective, wherein what are the consequences of certain decisions we make in a long-term perspective. So you think futuristically and think twice before you make decisions so that you can eliminate rash decisions. The third mental model is about making reversible decisions. So optimal decision making is combined with good speed. And to improve your speed, he says, distinguish between reversible and irreversible decisions. So he gives an example of painting a bathroom, which he says that's reversible. Whereas if you were to add a new bathroom, that's irreversible. So he says, think, how can I make this decision reversible, and what exactly does it take to make it a reversible decision? And reversible decision, he says, doesn't mean you're going back on your word, it's just adjusting your position. The fourth mental model is on seeking satisfaction. So he says focus on only what you need, and he's classified as maximizers and satisfiers. Maximizers, they want everything possible, they will go 100%, they are very picky, and they want perfection in everything. Whereas satisfiers, on the other hand, they accurately determine what is it that really matters. What is their purpose? This is just good enough. So he gives a very nice example. Let's say you go to a grocery store and you want to pick up peanut butter. He says, just at a high level, 2 or 3 parameters, if they are satisfied, it's good enough, go ahead and pick it. You don't have to, tick off everything, because it's not worth your time and effort on looking for 100% perfection. So quickly eliminate options by knowing what exactly satisfies you. The fifth model is on the principle of 40 to 70. So he says when you have a difficult decision to make, even if you get 70% of the approval, that's good enough, and just go ahead and do it, because anything less than 40 is, again, you're just guessing and you're just wasting your time. Sixth model is on minimizing regret, where he shared a framework. So he says, see yourself when you're 80 years old. And if you were to look back at that age, would you have any regrets? So ask yourself this question. In X number of years, will I regret taking this decision? or not taking this decision. And this framework will force you to think and then decide. The second chapter talks about how you can think more clearly. So because he says sometimes we rely on the stories of other people and therefore our views may be biased and it becomes inaccurate, our decisions. So the first mental model under this mental model 7 he gives is to ignore black swans. So like you know, in Europe in the 18th century, the absence of swans in any other color, and they didn't have reason to believe that there could be swans apart from white. So they didn't know that black swans existed. So it is a metaphor to describe unpredictable events that create a massive change in perception, perspective, and our understanding. So there are 3 elements in a black swan event. What are they? It's a big surprise. It has a major effect, and people attempt to rationalize it after the event. So he gives a nice example here. He says, should you stop driving cars just because you heard an acquaintance met with a car accident? No, right? So he says that's why one needs to ignore the black swan events because they are just outliers. Mental model 8 is about looking for equilibrium points, and this is based on the concept of diminishing returns. He says increase in resources doesn't always correspond to increase in outcomes that you want. Because the more resources we put into something, the less we get out of it. So the nice example he shares here is about Goldilocks. I'm sure all of us have read the story of Goldilocks, right? So wherein, she examines everything of the baby bear and says, this is just right. It's neither too hard, neither too soft, and it is perfect. So he says, look for equilibrium points. Mental model 9 is about wait for regression to mean. So in this, you find real patterns of data so that you don't get fooled. So he gives an example. He says if you're dating somebody and your apartment is kept really neat and clean so that you want to impress the other person, but this doesn't represent your true behavior. So he says just wait and see, be patient, use your gut feeling and evaluate and plan your future so that you can be more precise and practical. Mental model 10 is about what would Bayes do? So Bayes' theorem is something that is used for predicting what would happen if other meaningful events have occurred. So there's a formula to calculate probabilities and predict the future based on real events. So that is what Mental Model 10 is about. And Mental Model 11 is about do it like Darwin. Darwin's thinking, was slow because he was highly detail-oriented. And he believed that in order to be an expert, it doesn't happen overnight, and therefore you need to spend more time to delve into the details. So Darwin immersed himself against evidence that went against his findings because he says the human mind is such that it's inclined to dispose of contrary theories. Somebody doesn't align to what you say, you just tend to dispose of, right? So that's what he says, do it like Darwin. Mental Model 12 is about thinking with System 2. What is that? So it says the human brain saves energy for dangerous situations and doesn't realize that it can actually cause flawed thinking. The System 1, if you were to laugh, cry, these are automatic and instinctive and it's effortless, it doesn't spend energy. Whereas if you use your System 2, that's a lot more slower, it's draining, it's tiresome because you're contemplating on things and you're being a lot more analytical and therefore use System 2. Then the chapter 3 dwells upon problem solving. So he says step outside your head and see a situation and the problem as clearly as you can because even the most respected and the trusted world leaders, they have advisors, they have coaches to act as their sounding boards so that, they get their ideas vetted and they are being challenged. So this is something that I really like because as a coach, I have been doing this to a lot of leaders. So here he uses the Mental Model 13, which is peer review your perspectives. So he says this is used to understand consensus view and why your perspectives may actually differ. So the goal of getting a peer to review your work is to guard against inaccuracies, omissions, and to offer alternate viewpoints. Because, all of us are wired to think in a certain direction, and a peer can give us a completely different perspective. Mental Model 14 is to find your flaws. So he says, ask yourself, if you want your perspective to fail, what is the easiest way for that to happen? Because he says we are all having confirmation bias. We normally start with the conclusion in mind and therefore we work backwards, and that's how the human mind is wired. So mental model 15 talks about separate conclusion from causation. So he says, understand what is it that needs to be addressed to solve your problem. Because we are easily fooled into confusing correlation and causation. So he gives a nice example here. He says, during the summer months, right, the sales of ice cream increases, and so does the sale of sunglasses. Now, is it right to say that people are buying ice creams because people are buying sunglasses? No, and vice versa, right? So he says, you need to separate the correlation from the causation. Mental model 16 is about storytelling in reverse. So here he shares about the fishbone diagram, which many of you may be aware of, wherein you identify multiple potential causes and you get to the root cause and you flesh out the possible causes for the problem at the same time. So scrutinize what are the causes that's listed and how much do the identified cause actually contribute to the effect. Analyze it. Mental model 17 is something called seperate. So this is a very methodical approach to solve problem solving and finding solutions. It's actually an acronym. So SCAMPER, S stands for substitute. Is there a substitute to a particular product or process? C is to combine. Can you combine 2 or 3 different products? So he gives a nice example of a spork. Do you know what's a spork? Combining a spoon and a fork, right? So many times you have like a spoon, but then the edges are like that of a fork. So therein you're combining different things. So he says, can you combine? A is to adapt. Can you adjust something so that you can enhance things? That's something he asks. M is to either minimize or magnify, wherein you get new insights or lesser significance into a particular problem. P is to look for put to another use. Is there another use for particular process or product? And E is to eliminate, whatever is unwanted you eliminate, and R is to reverse, wherein you switch the order of the process or you tend to rearrange things to see how you can fit in everything. Mental model 18 is about getting back to first principles. So he quotes Elon Musk here, wherein he asks, how can we be so sure that we aren't attempting to solve a problem based on imperfect or incomplete solutions? This is something that Elon Musk asked. So this mental model is used to break the preconceptions and finding your own solutions to it. Because he says assumptions aren't always correct. Are you just blindly following the blind? He wants you to think and reflect on that. Then he gives the example of SpaceX, wherein SpaceX, wanted to send rockets into the space, but with the high price of rockets, that was being a roadblock to them. So instead of buying rockets from other companies, SpaceX decided to insource the process and purchase the raw materials and build the rockets themselves. And thereby, SpaceX managed to cut the price of launching a rocket to a fraction of it. So what did Musk do here is use the first principles, thinking to break the situation down to fundamentals, and simply asked, what does it take to get into outer space? So he shares 3-step process to get past our assumptions. The first is to identify and define your current assumptions. Second is to break down the problem into the first principles. And third is to create the solutions right from scratch. So the first principle leaves you with a set of facts and desired outcomes from where you forge your own solutions. Chapter 4 talks about anti-mental models, that is how avoidance can actually breed success. And this chapter will provide you clarity on avoiding the negatives so that you can breed success by pursuing your goals. Mental model 19 is about avoiding direct goals. So what is it you want to avoid? What would your terrible manager do? Avoid those actions. So define failure and create methods to avoid things at all costs. Mental model 20 is about avoiding to think like an expert, where you see the big picture and the finer details. Because he says experts don't always think about finer details. So he gives a nice example. How many of you watched the Oscar-winning movie, Bravehearts? Can I see a show of hands? Only 2 people? Yeah, okay. Yeah, some more. Great. Okay. So in this movie, he says there was one blunder. Although the blunder was just for a second, a lot of people actually noticed it. In this movie, there is an SUV automobile featured in the middle of a medieval battle. Right? There were no automobiles at that time, right? So this was one small blunder, and experts tend to overlook such things. So mental model 21 is to avoid your non-genius zone. He says, focus your resources and time on your strengths. So leverage your strengths, play to your strengths, and know your limitations. Mental model 22 is about avoiding your to-do list. Because he says, use your attention on what matters right now, and we can't differentiate between what we should avoid and what we actually deserves our attention. And writing down, many of us have the habit of writing a to-do list, so that can be a good reminder, but the question you need to ask is, what are the tasks that creates the biggest impact for you for today? And he says you could even prepare a don't-do list, because they are the ones that actually steal your time and undermine your goals. So exclude things that don't add value, because ask yourself, is it really worth your time? Mental model 23 is to avoid the path of least resistance, and this is to exercise self-discipline and willpower. And this means you ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? And what are the actions for right goal? The chapter 5 is all about oldies. I'm sure oldies are goldies is what he says, and many of us are probably familiar with a lot of these things. Mental model 24 is about Murphy's law, which says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So plan for the worst case scenario. Mental model 25 is about Ocean's Razor. The simplest explanation that one can usually give is the correct one, and that is your best approach. 26 is about Hallen's razor, and he says this can be used to explain actions by giving others the benefit of doubt, and this can also help improve your relationships, because you don't suspect people and just give them the benefit of doubt. Mental model 27, yet another popular one, which is your Pareto's principle, which is your 80-20 principle, where your time and resources will create the biggest impact. And the idea of Pareto principle is not to cut corners, but to maximize efficiency. Mental model 28 is about Sturgeon's law, and this is used to protect your mental resources. And this is interesting because he says 90% of everything is crap, and it's just the 10% that's actually meaningful. So he also he says sometimes what we consider as crap could be gold for somebody else. Mental model 29 and 30 talks about the Parkinson's laws, and this can be used to stop procrastinating and get done more with lesser time. So here he talks about triviality, because we all like to think and feel that we are productive, and therefore we tend to procrastinate things. So he says, know what is your real priority. And combating triviality is by having a clear, strict agenda, knowing your overall goals for the day, and developing awareness to see where is it that you're losing your energy. And Parkinson's law, like we know, states about work expands so as to fill the available time for completion. I'm sure many of us go through it, right? If we have sufficient time, we just prolong things. So he says, push yourself to finish early and free your mind. Save your time by giving yourself less time. So to conclude, what could have been better in the book? My perspective is that there could have been a lot more examples and slightly lesser fluff, though it's a small, quick read. The recall value of these 30 mental models, sometimes it can seem overwhelming. And the last thing is, there are no new concepts by the author. I think what he has done is he just put together a lot of them together. But yet, what I liked about the book is that, these are all very useful, and we can use it in different scenarios in our professional and personal lives. The oldies, which are the goldies, are a great reminder, and most importantly, I think all these mental models have the capacity to produce effective results, because they are all tried and tested mental models. So that is the quick summary of this book. Though the book is small, I'm sure the summary took long, because, we dwelled upon 30 different mental models. Now let's see what our speakers have to say about each of these things, and I have a set of questions for them, so let's pick their brains on it. So, Rajan, what are your thoughts on this book?
Sangeeta, I'd like to start by saying you summarized the book really well for everyone. I don't think there's much left for us to do, but
I'd like to hear your practical views, your experiences, which is unique to each person, right? So, yeah.
So I'll start by talking about what I felt about the book. The book, of course, this was something that we were also discussing just before we got in, right? None of what you read in the book, and especially if you're someone who's worked or is a seasoned, professional, these are principles that you would have heard of, read about, right, or discussed with peers, with groups or forums that you'd be a part of, right? So none of these, I would say, are rocket science or in fact even very complex models. But what I really appreciate about the way the author has presented the book is, one, the flow with which each of these concepts are bundled together, right? I think that's a very, very nice way that the 5 different chapters that you spoke about, how he's bundled each of those concepts together. That was something that was very refreshing, and the flow really was well done. 2, in terms of while a lot of these concepts are concepts that you already are aware of, it's always good to have a refresher course, especially if, for people like us who all the time are busy doing things, right? I mean, whether it's important work, whether it's urgent work, whether it's important but not urgent or not urgent work, and we do all of those. While we all want to be productivity monkeys, as they call it, right? We want to find hacks to make the best use of our time. A book like this, helps you refresh concepts that you're already aware of, and actually makes you go back to the drawing board, and think as to what can you do better. So again, that was something that I really enjoyed about reading the book. Lastly, I would say, in a forum like this, especially I was just telling this to Sangeeta, I also felt that it was like preparing for an exam for me. So while I wrote my chartered accountancy exam close to about 20 years back, almost 20 years back, every time I still have to sit down, read a book, collect my thoughts. I remember, how I used to diligently take notes back when I was studying for my exams, and this made me do that. So, very happy that Sangeeta gave me this opportunity. And again, the book, I'd say, it's a wonderful book. Not too complex concepts, but concepts that you can apply in your daily life.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rajan, for sharing that. Mohan, to you, what is it that you liked about this book, and is there anything you didn't like about the book?
So, most of the points here you and Rajan had covered, but I want to share my personal thoughts about this book. Why I like this book is, this book also applies to the young generation today, okay? Because they decide on their better halves these days predominantly, okay? They can also apply these data points, okay? Yeah. It may actually touch upon the personal things, but very good. Actually, when I read this book, actually, how he relates the data to the real life. Okay? See, one scenario I would like to tell here is a real-time story. My sister's daughter, when she loved a person, and my sister called me and told me, okay, she's in love with another person, and we are decide on these cases. Then I said, give the phone to my sister's daughter. Okay. I asked 2 questions. Will that person whom you are deciding to marry will take care of you? In worst case scenario, if anything goes wrong, you have to take care of him as well. You are deciding on a certain case. It's a lifetime thing, okay? Because the very speciality about this book is, it talks about many management lessons and also the life lessons, okay? Which is very, very, very important things. It applies to the layman. Not only for the management students or the people who are working in the corporate world. Really, this applies to the layman's life as well. We can decide on many things. We forget many things in the daily run. Okay? And if we apply this model, we will be able to cautiously avoid certain things and achieve our objectives. This is another thing. And another speciality about this is 40-70 principle. Okay? So don't look at extreme things, okay? If you have a data in place, between 40 to 70, you should be able to decide. So, another thing, this book is written in paper and something like that. I am from a database related company, data company. Shortly, all these use cases will be built in an AI. We will have an app soon for all these scenarios. We have to tell data points to the app and it will be able to design on our behalf. And mark my word, it will be 70 to 80% precisely right. Because people started reading our brains. Okay? Human intervention definitely will be there. But data is already started ruling the world. Okay? And many of us don't know. I am saying the so-called literates in this world don't know how the data is really ruling the world. Okay? So shortly it is going to take over the human brains. Okay? Already GenAI is there. All these people are behind GenAI and this book will be automated as an app shortly. And it will be a big business.
Spoken truly like a data guy. Thank you for that, Mohan. To you, Rajan, I mean, the book, like I said, speaks about 30 different mental models. So, which is your favorite one out of this? And have you used any of them? And how have you benefited if you have used?
That's a nice question. I'd actually, there were several of them which really appealed to me. But if I were to single out a couple of them, right? So the first one is, you spoke about peer reviewing yourself, right? I think that is one principle that I very faithfully apply because the one thing that we all get caught up in is doing things and getting things done, right? A lot of times for us to be self-critical of the work that we do is pretty difficult, right? And I just like to quote an example. This was from my. So we started. Once you clear the CA exams, there's this course called GMCS that you need to necessarily undergo, which is about general management and communication skills, right? And as I remember, so I did this course in Delhi, which is where I come from. And one of the trainers, very simple question he asked us was, as a budding professional, what should you focus on? Should you focus on your strengths or should you focus on your weaknesses? And of course, you had that question divided the room. There were several people who said we should focus on our strengths. Some people said we should focus on our weaknesses. But he gave a very, very simple example. He said that you should focus on your strengths because other people will focus on your weaknesses, right? And that thing, I mean, even though it's 20 years, since I still remember it like yesterday because it's so true. I mean, and whenever you need critical feedback, all that you need to do is you need to go and ask people for critical feedback because people are always looking for those chinks in your armor. They're looking for things that you're not doing right. So, and it also helps you in your professional journey. So, I think that's very, very important. And I do apply that, myself. The second one is again, while there's this whole principle of black swan, and I'd want to talk about this specifically because a lot of us as well tend to work with a worst case scenario most often, right? I mean, we always keep anticipating that something will go drastically wrong, right? Or this person that I work with, is going to give me a bad feedback at the end of this project, or it could be, it could always be assuming the worst case scenario. So, and I took up this current role, just to let you know, I'm the CFO at Latent View, but I joined them at a time where they had just started the IPO process, right? And I, as a finance professional, had never been a part of an IPO process. So the company took a huge leap of faith and a bet on me to sort of run this process, which is of course a dream come true for any CFO, but is as lovely as that sounds, it's also nerve-wracking, right? Because just because of the number of variables that you have to work with, the number of external people that you need to work with. So we were working with 3 sets of lawyers. We were working with 3 sets of merchant bankers, and there was an accounting firm, which is stat auditors, and then you had an external accounting firm. So you had 8 sets of people. Plus, I was new to the organization. I had no history, no sort of tribal knowledge of how the company was built, how have we grown, intricacies of the, legacy accounting issues, finance issues, right? So when I joined the company, every day I would assume the worst, thinking that, there was an outer deadline by which we had to hit the market. And the simple remit that my founder gave me was when I joined the organization. So I joined the company in beginning of July. The simple remit was we need to go public before Diwali, right? So that was the goal. So we had 6 months to get the IPO done. In fact, less than 6 months. And we had just started the process. I can tell you, I had several sleepless nights assuming the worst, that I'm not going to be able to deliver on this project. We are going to miss the timelines and obviously this is going to be the biggest failure of my life. But as luck would have it, right? I mean, I think a lot of times you have to anticipate the worst, but also be prepared for it and be resilient. I think that's the one big, I would say, learning for me while I, kept thinking that something really drastic would happen. At the back end, I was also preparing for it, and I was getting more and more resilient. And over time, I broke the larger problem into simple building blocks. And guess what? We were able to hit the market before Diwali. Our IPO was hugely successful, right? But through the process, there were several times that I questioned myself and I assumed the worst. But this is a big learning for me that, as long as you have a dependable team and people that you can work with, and break down the problems into simple, maybe steps, you can get to, great results. So that's another,
Lovely, very
experience.
nice examples. Thank you for sharing that. Mohan, to you. So have you used any of these mental models either knowingly or unknowingly? Sometimes we are just wired to, it automatically comes, right? So many times they're like, for example, the system 1 and system 2. Only when I read about it, I realized, and then I'm like, yeah, we all do use this, right? So have you had any such experiences, and how do you think it has helped you grow?
Yeah. So, see, I worked for a company, Indium Software, for 14 years, I was in the growth journey of the company, When I joined, the company was 100 people, and when I left, it was 3,200 people, Last 5 years of the companies, when I was there, the growth was tremendous, We have to decide on the fly, In fact, CTO decision, was made on the fly, because there was an urgency. We made a wrong hire in the past, and we had to take one decision immediately, So, surprisingly, one of the junior recruiter, was given this assignment to hire a person for a VP position, And he had never dealt with leadership hires in the past. So he had to be taught. What I gave the confidence, I don't have a time to teach and all those things. I said, it is a experience for you, Try your luck, She tried her luck and gave one VP person for that position. Later, eventually he had grown and he served the company. He grown the company to 3,200 member organizations as a CTO. So where I am coming is, in this, one of the lesson, don't rely on always experts' opinion. As a human, when something goes wrong, go and consult with the expert. Whoever is well versed in that field, we go, talk to them, get his advice, and we will simply follow. That may fail also. That we may get successful as well. But where I am coming is that initial decision of hiring that person was decided by a junior 4-year recruiter. And it paid off. So, one of the model teaches that don't have to rely on experts' opinion. So that was very impressive for me. That was a lesson learned. And another thing, from my corporate world, the same company, I have seen a CEO, and if hiring mistake happens, he takes the blame. Mohan, I made a decision finally, I hired a wrong person, and let us replace him by another person, Not many leaders will volunteer for owning the decisions, Even though it is a mistake of a group of people, I made a decision because he is the final decision maker, And quickly. So, there are instances, our decision may go wrong. We don't have to get panicked. That is where the author says, all your decisions should be reversible, But that doesn't apply in life. Okay. There are instances where we need to choose a life partner. I am again coming back to the personal life. Okay. So use your maximum data and inferences study to pick up your life partner. Okay. There is no wrong choice or right choice. It is up to us. If we decide, we have to own the decision. Okay. Don't blame the parents. So that's my take.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that, Mohan. To you, Rajan. The mental model 22 talks about avoiding the to-do list, right? And then there the author has mentioned about the tasks that are insignificant, that don't help the bottom line. So I thought, as a CFO, what are your perspectives? Have you encountered such situations, and how have you navigated through that?
That's again an interesting question, and you're absolutely right. And it very often what I do is while everyone looks at and I have this habit of on a Sunday evening, I typically look at my calendar for the following week, right? And I look at what are the meetings that are that have been scheduled. What I also do is I also reflect back on the week that's just gone by in terms of where is it that I've actually spent my time, right? Interestingly, and this is something that I've gotten slightly better over the last, I would say, a year or two, is to specifically avoid getting into meetings where people love to get, obviously senior management time. They also love to get your opinions on, they may have done the work, but they would want a second opinion from you, a third opinion from you, right? And I invariably get pulled into several of these meetings, where my input may probably be needed for, say, 10% of the overall problem, but I would have to sit through some of these meetings, right? So a lot of times what I do is I decline meeting requests, for instance, and I say, whatever decision that you need from me specifically, come do